Of the Palestinian issue. Let me say that the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian question, it is very personal question I have assumed for a long time. I have mentioned to you that before I became an academic, I used to be a journalist, a founder, and after that I became the director of a magazine which circulated over 31 years in Spanish, Portuguese, and during 8 years also in English. That was called Third World. And in the late 70s, it was the first time I visited Middle East, Africa, and the African countries too. With the African people, and with the Arabs, and in particular with Palestinians, I am sure that I became, with their lessons, I became a better human being. With the Palestinian, I have learned about patience, about solidarity, about persistence, about faith in the truth of their cause, and therefore for me is an honor, a pleasure to be here and to be the chair of this roundtable. So I'm very honored and very glad to introduce you the three comrades, friends that are going to share with us the reflections about this important issue of our times, that as we have seen through many speakers, and particularly Darwish told us this in the first presentation, the Palestinian question is still the only one among all those very difficult problems that were discussed in this local in Bandung in 1955. The Palestinian issue is the only one that hasn't been solved till today. So it is a great responsibility for all of us as citizens of this moment of the world of the second century to be commitment to the fulfilling of this cause. We have here three important contributions. First of all, let me change here. Okay. First of all, I will introduce to you Mr. Faris Mehdawi. He is at the moment the ambassador of Palestine here in Indonesia. Our second, here in my left side, a dear militant, former diplomat, and a warrior, Noha, academic and researcher, historian, who is always commitment to his people, Noha Khalaf, Palestine, who lives at the moment in France, and at least a very important scholar, Palestinian scholar, Mr. Makram Khoury Mahmoud, Dr. Makram Khoury Mahmoud, who is Palestinian at the present in the United Kingdom. And when I give the floor to each of them, I will mention the particular aspects they are going to take about. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is with you. I am obliged to control the time, 10 minutes for each, at least at the first moment, because we are very, very late.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good afternoon for all of dear friends and brothers who are so generous to come this afternoon and to listen into a topic which I call it not very pleasant, to hear about. It is quite problematic, it's still valid, it's sometimes disturbing, and sometimes it's also interesting. It depends how you look at it, how you approach it. But one thing that we all can agree about, that it's quite important issue at the political agenda of the world. It happened to be at the center, actually, of the world, if you look at the map, even connecting 3 continents. It is controlling even the maritime networks. And it happened to be also the center of the 3 monolithic religions, which talks about God: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So as you can see, it's little place as such, but it is so much important and strategic. And that makes it more and less not really that little when it comes to the politics of the world, and there is huge intake and interest for everybody almost. This is what makes Palestine actually quite central when we talk about Asia and Africa. Not even before we have got any ambassadors or even a state of our own or even the BLO. In this very room where we are all sitting, Palestine was present in 1955 when the first ever Asia-Africa conference has been held and initiated by Sukarno and the other Asian leaders and African leaders. 2 countries were not actually invited to this gathering, Israel and South Africa. South Africa, because it was a racist regime and racism was not acceptable. And Israel was not allowed to come because Israel is a colonial project. And the whole concept of Asia-Africa Conference was against colonialism, in essence, and against apartheid, against slavery. So these 2 countries do not qualify to be part from Asia-Africa if they remain as they are. Now, they have been replaced by 2 substitutes, namely the ANC of South Africa and Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Palestine and the leader of all government of Palestine, or government of all Palestine, if you like. This is the fact, happened in this room. And if you go into the archive of this place, you'll find a lot of meetings between Al-Hajj Amin, with Auyeung Lai, Sukarno, Jamal Abdel Nasser. So Palestine was at the center of Asia and Africa because of the nature of the issue. And that's really what makes me interested to make the first point. What is it about Palestine? What is the nature of this conflict? Every conflict in the world has its own nature, and we can define it in one way or another. Some people would like to see Palestine as it's a conflict between Muslims and Christians, or maybe even Jews. In that sense, it's never been the case. Because Palestine is the land for all these religions, and they coexist all along. And who knows, even the current Palestinian might be the same Jews who accepted to be converted into Christians, and maybe later on converted to become Muslims. Because those European Jews who came from Europe, they came as colonialists, they did not come as Belgians. They have been transferred through a process, not from colonialism. The very idea of Israel itself to be a state was not a Jewish one in essence. It was Napoleon at some point, and Palmerston and another, 1856, well before the Zionist movement even came to existence. So it was a colonial in essence. That's not to say that we have now a situation that we need to reverse, because history, as you know, is an accumulation of de facto situation which can build itself into new facts and realities. Just like how much we see whites in South Africa. Those came for different reasons, but now they are South Africans. Or those whites who went into Brazil, like my sister, and they settled over there and they became Brazilians. They are not anymore Portuguese. So the issue that we have got now a situation in Palestine, de facto situation, doesn't mean that we need to reverse history. Sometimes history is not reversible. But then we have to solve all colonial stories came to an end by a way or another. Sometimes by removing and abolishing the indigenous people altogether, like what happened maybe in Australia or New Zealand or Canada or I don't know where. And some of it by really win-win situation by those newcomers with the indigenous, like what happened in Cuba, Brazil, and other places. Somewhere, no, the colonialist has been defeated altogether and removed out, like the case of Algeria, for example, 150 years, and not a single French has been accepted in Algeria. And the whole project of integrating Algeria to become part from France had totally failed. Other colonialist forms was not about really replacement, like the case of Indonesia, for example. The Dutch never been interested really to change the nature of Indonesia. They were interested to loot the natural resources, the economy mainly. Like in India, for example. The British stayed there 400 years, and it is now one line in history books. Where are now the British in India? Actually, there are more Indian restaurants in London than those in Bombay, maybe. It's the other way around. So colonialism has been a way or another. Now we are in Palestine. I mean, how this is going to end? This is the big question that we are interested to see for ourselves. Well, the whole world had agreed that there is enough place for both. And the formula is that we need to coexist. The issue, how we are going to exist. Are we going to coexist like prostitutes, for example, not married, not divorced? Or we can get married and can live together like a happy family, regardless of the name. Actually, Gaddafi suggested at one time that we could call it, what was the name? Israel. He combined two syllables from Israel and from Palestine, Din in Arabic. I don't care really whether this is the proper name or not, we can agree. If they are ready to live together in one state, that is not an issue for us as Palestinians, we are ready to accept. Actually, that was our first proposal at the beginning. We thought that it could work. Or we can get divorced temporarily and live next to each other, like what the whole world now agrees about. Two-state solution. Now, whether this one or the other, I cannot see another third possibility, except maybe another apartheid regime, which the world had rejected at the beginning, even in South Africa. So here we are, demographically speaking, around 51% of those who are living now in historical Palestine are Christians and Muslims, Arab in cultural way, and the rest are Jews, some of them immigrants from here and there, in the form of the State of Israel. But all in all, with the 100% who are now inhabiting Palestine historically, they are living side by side, not in a very ideal way, because more than half of the population are practically discriminated about, and Jimmy Carter called it to be an apartheid system. Actually, those who lived under apartheid, from our friends in South Africa, they call it even much worse than the apartheid that they experienced themselves. This is why no wonder that Israel with these practices has been rejected altogether by every regional and international organization around the whole world, including the United Nations, Human Rights Council, everywhere. So this is why, as Palestinians, we are happy to see that the world see the dimension of our challenge. We cannot see, really, actually, that this kind of conflict could be resolved by force from both sides. Israel, with its more than 200 nuclear warheads, cannot really change the status quo, which is on ground. This is where force and strength and military power cannot really work. And we are happy to see that the world see our plight. And this is why, right from South, from Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung, 1955, now it's 143 countries believe that we are entitled for the state. And they recognize us in the United Nations. And the other day, His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas had raised the flag of Palestine, just like every other country member of the United Nations. Parliaments, head of states, governments in all Europe, Christians, no matter what's their religion, Chinese, Hindus, they all accept Palestine to be a fact and necessity if a peace is really still desirable in the Middle East. The peace in the Middle East is the key for the international peace. One of the most poisoning actually factor in the international relation between the 1.5 Muslims around the world and the rest of the world is actually Palestine issue. One of the pretexts for those fundamentalists and terrorists, if I like, that they justify what they act like Daesh and the others is using Palestine as a pretext, for right or wrong. But they all the time claim that when it comes to Palestine, the international community seems to be having double standards, and they do not enough, do to stop Israel of doing all the crimes, which is on camera, by the way. We had seen that. I just coming from Jerusalem, and kids of 15 and 16 and 14 are directly exposed to being killed, simply because they are protesting. Israel had told the world that Jerusalem is the own eternal Jewish capital for the Jewish state. Let me tell you, 500,000 of this city citizens are there, and they don't seem to be happy with this kind, and they practice every day that we are not part from this unified eternal capital of the Jewish state. It seems Israel, even after all these years, didn't succeed really to convince those inhabitants, 500,000, that they belong to this Jewish state, which discriminates against its own citizens. That cannot go, and the world is not tolerant about that. Israel will not be allowed to be the only example in the world which has its word over the whole international and human values, on peace, on equality, on an order in itself. That's where comes our strength, beside the fact that our people are deep-rooted in this land. Deep-rooted. We've been there centuries, if not thousands and thousands of years, and I'm happy that one of my good nationals are with you today to tell you the story of history. That's Her Excellency Ambassador Noah, because she was actually a career like me, but she preferred really to do it from a different angle. But still we have the same spirit, and she will cover a huge part from the historical background. And my great, nice academic citizen and national, my brother Makram Khouri, Michael, I call him. Well, it's called Mahfour, but Michael in the other way. He will tell you how Palestine as an issue has been exposed when it comes to the international media, fairly or unfairly, and what's the dynamics on that area. And we might end up with a Q&A session. At that point, I'll be happy to answer whatever question comes into your mind, especially with regard to what's happening right now in the area. Because we are part from an area which is very unstable also, to tell you frankly. What's happening in Syria, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Yemen, Libya, all around the Middle East, which is boiling since the last 5 years, is affecting us badly as well. You might be interested maybe to have my intake on those issues, which is actually just ongoing. Palestine is badly affected in these situations, and I think no matter what happens in the region, the core issue for the Middle East and the peace in the Middle East depends on Palestine as the root of the all causes and the all issues of lack of stability in the Middle East. With these words, I should stop right now and refrain from going on, because we have a very tough moderator here who is not tolerant with gender-wise, at least, with ambassadors. I stop here, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for such a summarized and important vision, historically and also the present moment, the challenges of the present moment on the question of Palestine. And as we have very little time, I directly give the floor with great pleasure to Noha Halaf to make us her speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their kind hospitality, and I would like to thank also Dr. Khuduri for his efforts to bring together all this great number of interesting people in this. I would like to also thank our ambassador, Mr. Farid Dawi, for the interesting talk that he just gave. and I would like to approach the matter as a historian. I was first a political scientist, and then I turned into historian through the study of many historical concepts. And I think that undigging historical truth is a very important matter. If we find that the situation today is not, or is a repetition of what happened before, it doesn't mean that we would look for a reversal of history, as our ambassador, His Excellency, said. So maybe we will try to find out better options for the future, not a return to the past. First of all, since we are here today in this great Asian country, Indonesia, with a long history of support to Palestine and Third World movements of liberation, and which hosted the most important conference which we are commemorating today, it is worth recalling on this occasion that the Zionist movement, since its inception, and as expressed in the words of its main ideologues, Theodor Herzl, linked between Asia and Palestine, because he, in his book, The Jewish State, which he published in 1896, said that Israel was supposed to be a European rampart against Asian barbarism. That was in 1896, at the time that the Indian national movement was giving trouble to the British. So Asian barbarism is everybody's barbarism here today. African, Asian, and Palestinian. So we are part of the same history. He said that this state then should protect Europe from these waves of Asian barbarians, while the Palestinian population, which he called the Arab peasantry, should be spirited or expelled across the Jordan River. So what we have today is a continuation of this process. I want to use also a concept that a great French philosopher used in his book, History and Memory, where he distinguishes between history and memory and talks about the process of identity formation of any nation through events. That there are events which he calls supra-significative, which means super significant in the history of a people. Like, for example, Bandung is a super significant event in the process of African-Asian nation building, and other events which might seem to be not super significant and identity forming. And he gives interesting examples about European history, saying, for example, the takeover of the French Bastille is a super significant event in French history with a positive consequence for the French people. Whereas the Shoah, which is the Nazi, against the Jews massacre, is also a super significant event for Europe, but in a negative way, because it has produced fear and guilt feelings in Europe, with the fear that such things may be repeated. And it's a coincidence today that the Prime Minister of Israel goes to Germany and tries to link between Islam and the Nazi oppression and the Nazi massacre of the Jews. And it came out in the media that Netanyahu went to Germany and said that Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Palestine, was the one who asked Hitler to kill the Jews. At the time that Europe is facing, a wave of Islamophobia, so he was trying to put the blame on the Muslims for killing the Jews, and the German Chancellor put him in his place. She said, "We did it." it's not, how can you think that it would be Muslim instigation? And there's a joke, a video that came out saying Hitler wakes up and gets very angry, says, all I've done is not me, I've done all that. You know, it's not the Arabs or the Muslims. So history is still present today. But my paper is not about the Shoah or about European history, it's just about this question of super significant events. And I want to talk about Palestinian identity, the formation of Palestinian identity and of the Palestinian nation through these super significant events in the history of Palestine. And if we look at the balance sheet between super significant events, the negative ones and the positive ones, of course, the negative ones outweigh the positive ones. I will leave it to our ambassador later to comment on the positive aspects, what happened, the Palestinian Revolution 1964, the Declaration of Independence, as maybe positive, super significant events in the history of Palestine, whereas the other events which are commemorated every year by the Palestinians, wherever they are, start with the question of the Balfour Declaration, which is the main question I want to address today. The Palestinians, every year, and it's 3 days from now, on the 2nd of November, they commemorate, sadly, the question of the Balfour Declaration, but also to make a point, a historical point, that it was the collusion between British colonialism and Zionist movement which created the Israeli state. And so, there are other main significant events. The Nakba, which is the supra-significant event of 1948, is commemorated every year also by the Palestinian population. The Beirut siege of 1982 and the Sabra and Shatila massacre of 1982 are celebrated, not celebrated, but commemorized, it's different, but every year, because these have been major events in the formation of Palestinian identity. And what I want to talk about is today in particular is the Balfour Declaration and the importance and significance of this declaration. Because although we commemorate it, we always concentrate on the first part of the declaration, although it's a very short declaration, which is 64 words. I will read it later on as I go along. So, after that was, if Herzl's book was in 1897, and 1896 and 1897 was the first Zionist Congress in Balfour. 20 years later, after this book, and after the holding of the first Zionist Congress, the victorious European colonial powers, following World War I, and following the dismantlement of the Ottoman Empire, started to plan for the realization of Herzl's program. And since 1915, there was a correspondence between Hussein, the Sharif Hussein, and McMahon, where France had commissioned someone called Georges Picot, and Britain had commissioned someone called Mark Sykes, and they were to define the respective zones of influence in the Middle East. Their joint work was ratified by the British Minister of Foreign Affairs and by France's ambassador in London. 3 zones were defined in the Sykes-Picot Accords, and in 2016, it will be the centenary of the Sykes-Picot Accords, which divided the area in the Middle East and started to apply the idea of a Jewish national homeland. So the territory was divided. Part of it was to be under French mandate, part of it was to be under British mandate, but a small portion, which is Palestine today was sacrificed and so-called left to it, and should be 1 year later, which is 1917, the Balfour Declaration states that this part shall be where the Jewish national home will be. So Sykes-Picot in 1916, Balfour Declaration 1 year later, and so trying to assess Balfour's legacy almost a century later, after the draft of the declaration, and in the Arab world it's called Balfour's Promise, not Balfour Declaration. Why? Because the British promised this area to the Jewish home. So it's very important to re-study all the terms used in the declaration. And actually, to be honest, I found a British journalist who in 1931 dissected, like a surgeon, in a very important and interesting and refreshing way, this resolution. This period of Arab history, 1914-1922, has been described as the period which created the modern Middle East. And that's David Frankel in a book called A Peace to End All Peace, while a great French historian also referred to the period 1913-1924 as the decade that unsettled the Middle East. So his brilliant analysis is that every idea in the Balfour Declaration was born in London, was tested by the Zionist organization in America, and that every suggestion that America received the most crucial attention in London. This coordination, he says that this declaration is only 64 words, took years and days of traveling across the ocean, and every word coined in the declaration was studied to the I have to try and be faster. No, I haven't concluded, I haven't started actually. For example, during a trip to the United States in May 1917, Balfour discussed his proposed declaration with Brandeis and had pledged his support for Zionism. On September 19th, Chaim Weizmann called Brandeis and showed him a version of the declaration, which was tentatively agreed upon by the British. Due to the opposition of British Jews to some of the wording of the first draft, Weizmann had to tone it down by October. So there were these constant negotiations about which terms to use in this declaration. Today we still, so I will read the actual wording of the declaration to be very fast. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities, or the rights, and this is the second statement which I want to concentrate on because we forget it, and nothing shall be done to jeopardize the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in other countries. They are giving two rights to the Jews. One, in the national home, and to keep political rights wherever they are. Now, the two great mystifications in this declaration is that they referred to the Arabs as the non-Jewish communities since 1917, whereas the Arabs were the majority, and the Jews in 1917 were a minority. But we were all, since that time, referred as the other, the non-Jewish one. This is a very, very important mystification of the history of Palestine. And that the political status of one interesting thing in the debates and the negotiations was that there was a word which says, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which raises the political and civil and religious rights of the. But then the word political rights of the non-Jewish population was cancelled. From that time on, the Palestinians were not to have political rights, even in their national. It is strange that this 64 or 65 words have played a very important role in what followed. So Jeffries, that he's the British Sheikh, reveals that Balfour had used discrete lowercase letters for the third national home for the Jews in the original version. And then it was substituted by capital initials in the declaration. The third national home was not of his invention, of course, but was according to another Israeli thinker. Anyway, the phrase, the word national home was a new phrase and had no established meaning. It simply meant that the British government was committing itself to it without knowing exactly what it was committing itself to. And the same way that the definitions were left ambiguous was to be found in the preamble, where the declaration was described as a declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations without defining what Jewish national aspirations meant. These sentences, according to Jeffries, were unfathomable phrases because they were meant to be unfathomable. The Zionists understood it to mean a Zionist state in Palestine. And the phrase view with favor, Her Majesty's views with favor, could have also been interpreted in different ways. Facilitating might mean for the British watching while the Zionists implement the Jewish national home, whereas it might mean actively participating in the process. So anyway, the will to deceive them was evident since that time. And the will to deceive and to manipulate and distort Palestinian history is still ongoing to the present day. It is, of course, of political consequence. You know, it is an attempt to deny the whole people the right to be in their original national home. Even Jeffries described this phrase as fraudulent and makes a joke, given Balfour's Scottish origins, says, why did Balfour do this to the Scots in comparison to the Irish? Why did he go to Palestine and try to remove the Palestinian people out of Palestine?
Shall we?
Okay, thank you for the moment. We will comment later. Okay? So I just leave it up to everybody to think with us how, what to do with history, actually, because even His Excellency started, we cannot reverse history. Nobody, I don't think we want to go back to a situation, but I think that, and I think as one of many Indonesians have said, justice is the most important thing. How can we reach a just solution? How can we establish justice? Not reverse history, but establish justice in the Middle
sorry to be obliged to cut such an interesting and important historical recognition of what happened in Palestine by our colleague and brilliant, in British Palestine, British colonial times for Palestine. But we should come again, of course, on that issue. I'm very glad to give the floor now, without any more comments, as due to time, to Dr. Makram. And I'm very hopeful to hear what he says, because media is also a problem I am researching, so I'm very aware of your research. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. Many thanks for inviting us here. Special thanks go to Dr. Darwish Khuduri, who is in fact a most magnificent ambassador to Indonesia and for world culture. Many thanks go as well to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to His Excellency Sharifuddin, and the rest of the team. Ladies and gentlemen, it remains fairly awkward to describe one man's feeling at the site of this gathering, at this venue. In fact, when the Bandung Conference took place in 1955, my parents were newlyweds in Palestine. And you would never imagine growing as a child in Palestine, reading about international historical events, how these events would form your life. And I quite admit that I was mainly politically raised by Palestinian communist figures back in Palestine, hearing about international events that actually had to do with the Third World and liberation movements as well as Palestine. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think that the title of the conference, which is the International Conference of the 60th anniversary of the 1955 Bandung Asian African Conference, is quite significant. And it's more so to mention that our Palestinian Nakba was in 48 and it's 7 years older than the Bandung Conference. In fact, our colleague and friend Dr. Nuha has just mentioned that our plight started in 1917, which makes it the longest military occupation in modern history. These were the spirits of Bandung in 1955, where everybody now in this magnificent convention know, and as Dr. Darwish mentioned, we're talking about liberation, freedom, equality, and peace building. From our point of view as Palestinians, yet the promises and the struggle have got to take place. We need liberation, we need independence, we need freedom, we need equality, and we need, of course, peaceful existence. But clearly, the subtitle of the conference says enhancing the role of scholars in promoting people-driven Asian-African partnership, which I find as well to be quite a challenging subtitle. Then myself, as a scholar, I would definitely say that I feel obliged, as a scholar in general, but as Palestinian in particular, I feel obliged to probably make a little modest contribution. But then, the challenging question that was put by the organizers as a title for this session is Palestine, what is needed from Asian African countries? Quite a challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I am neither wearing a diplomatic hat nor a political hat. I'm an independent scholar, and fortunately or unfortunately, I hold a British passport. I'm not English, but it's a British passport, So I hold actually the passport of all the occupiers. This grants me a particular immunity, if I may say so, to say something completely independent. Ladies and gentlemen, if you perhaps just read the news, you would definitely discover that India, a leader of this conference, is Israel's biggest importer of weapons. Furthermore, Nigeria, the biggest supposedly Islamic or not Islamic country in Africa, abstained in the vote for a Palestinian state last December in the UN. So, if these are the basic elements or the point of departure of our question, which is what is needed from Asian African countries, then we are facing a little bit of an uphill. However, I know that one needs not to be a Palestinian in order to express his solidarity in this way or another with the Palestinians. For it's neither human nor humane to think that you cannot be subjective. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a session about gender earlier. I'm not sure whether I was focused enough, but I'd like to borrow a sentence from a leading feminist in 1970, Carol Heinisch, who said, "The personal is political." And we cannot practically detach ourselves, whether we are Palestinians, Africans, Asians, Latin Americans, from a miscarriage of justice that has been going on for 67 years. And it's been going on because the media have not been telling the overwhelming majority of the world what is happening on the ground in Palestine. And it's in particular because the Jewish and the Israel lobby started already in 1917 and earlier, even actually in Basel in 1897, to set the format for this combination between money or finance and the media. I am not actually blaming them, and in fact you will not hear me saying anything wrong, neither against the Jews nor against Israel. I can only blame us and our friends for anything that we are not doing similar to what they are doing, and probably something that we should do or be doing better, especially in media. Every time there is any violence in Palestine, and let's just underline the term violence. What is violence? This is resistance, whether we agree with this form or another. There are people under occupation trying to resist peacefully or unpeacefully to seek and implement and have freedom, liberation and independence. What is wrong about that? Whereas you, in fact, plural, if we follow the media, mainstream media in the world, we will find that the flow of information which comes from the north to south is completely biased and controlled by Israel's Zionist lobby. Now, information, ladies and gentlemen, is available, and I'm not going to act here as a news agency at all, but the task is how do we join the dots and come with an organized plan. And this is exactly what I'm going to suggest, Dr. Darwish, to this conference. I am a scholar, but I'm Palestinian. I'm a peace activist, but I'm an internationalist. I fought and struggled for South Africa when I was a student in Oxford, and I was fighting as I were black African. And I expect every black African or yellow Asian to fight with me as Palestinian the way I fought with them when they had their fight. So what I'm asking actually will probably have something to do with the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieus' paradigm. He spoke about 4 types of power. economic, political, military, and cultural. And when he spoke about the cultural, he made a particular point and emphasized the symbolic culture. And the symbolic culture or power or capital is exactly, by and large, the way the world, all the media, frame our conflict in every possible language. Unfortunately, even in Britain, the mother of our plight, we Palestinians, even in Britain, there was a survey amongst young British who thought that Palestine is occupying Israel and not Israel is occupying Palestine. And this is thanks, in brackets, in a very ironical manner, to the fact that even the BBC, which I personally as well contribute to its public funding, even the BBC refused in 2009 to broadcast the appeal when Israel waged a war against the Palestinians. It was an appeal, a very charitable humanitarian appeal to help those affected in Gaza. Now, what I'm suggesting, in fact, is an answer to this question, what is needed from Asian African countries. I actually, if I may so, Madam Chairman, suggest the following. What can the African, Asian, Latin American do for Palestine? I'm going to suggest something that will make me ask you, what can Palestine do for you? And Palestine can do for you if we go back and stick to the Bandung spirits and principles. Because if we establish, and please kindly pay attention to the following sentence, if we establish a research-led lobby, I repeat, a research-led lobby, an international, transnational, cross-boundaries, whatever you call it, the Bandung Conference will be helped by Palestine, and Palestine will be helped by the Bandung Conference. And I am talking about a very sophisticated lobby, and I don't want to mention now what lobbies control or are powerful entities in the world. Least to mention would be Israel's lobby. Lobby is not anymore a bad word, ladies and gentlemen. You know, Excellencies, you know that this is the way to operate. When you combine, like the talk that our colleague from the university here suggested, when we combine research with plans, with activism, then we can probably launch and defend the spirits of Bandung, the Asian, African, Latin American partnership, and serve the Palestinian cause as a main cause which should be carried on the hands and in the brains of every peaceful person on earth. And what I'm suggesting, in fact, and I do very much applaud and very much have strong respect and admiration to the initiators of this conference, because I see it, and given the fact that this is a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary conference, I see it as a brainstorming for something that can happen in the future. This is exactly a research method tool, a brainstorming, a focus group, a survey, to hear all these opinions and to forge a network. But what I am saying is that it may well be that the Bandung spirits and the conference needs, or they need, rebranding, managing reputation, deciding on an image. And I saw a lot of contents, especially yesterday, from several interventions here that actually can serve Bandung and Palestine. They can serve Bandung and Palestine because I'm asking you kindly to express your solidarity by supporting us through symbolic culture, through symbolic power, through the media, and through cultural academic activities. Because we know that media are being fed by a lot of advisors who study at universities. And if they study the full picture and they have a panoramic view at the university, they study about Bandung and its spirits and about Palestine, that this is still the most pressing remaining issue since 1948, it will definitely give us an international intervention via a lobby which can work and incorporate all or many universities or all groups and NGOs, but it will be in fact run and managed according to the Bandung spirits and principles. And I'm talking actually about a proper organization, again, which should be, in my opinion, be a research-led lobby according to the Bandung spirits and principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kuli. Your speech allows me to inform you of two discrete but important victories that we had in Brazil. We, as a solidarity movement with Palestine, there are many committees in each city, at least in each main city of Brazil, committees of solidarity with Palestine. One important victory was that Israel appointed one of the leaders of the settlements in West Bank as Israeli ambassador to Brazil. There was such a denounce that obliged Israel to retreat and to suggest another ambassador. The second victory was that an important Israeli enterprise was already assumed as the one who will be assessoring and working together with the armed forces and the police in Brazil for the security of the Olympic Games that are going to take place next year. There was such a scandal, let us say, that the contract was broken. So I think we know that we can do many things perhaps without even knowing. And the third concrete steps we are managing to implement is the boycott of the products that are producing those settlements in West Bank, not to allow people to buy such products. And there is a site on the internet who has nominates all the products that are able to be boycotted, not to allow to be sold anywhere. So I think you pointed a very important aspect. We should be more aggressive in our step by supporting Palestinians by all the means we can have. Of course, the mass media is a crucial, special issue, and I suggested already to have in our next steps, I was talking that with Darwish, to have a special group working on media. So with great pleasure, I will, as we already have arranged, before giving the floor to the audience, give some 3 minutes to each of our speakers, or 5 minutes, okay, 5 minutes for them, as they were really have to summarize. Now they have the complete idea of the panel. They can have some comments, and after that, immediately we will open the floor to the audience. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. With great pleasure, the floor is now with you.
Well, thank you once again, Madam Chairperson. Actually, I find it necessary maybe a need to focus a little bit into what is the core of the matter and how we can address it. And it's not really just to indulge ourselves with more information, but rather to decide what is our homework all within the Asia-Africa spirit and Bandung spirit, actually. Of course, I mean, history is for historians, and history is his story, not her story. So there are so many, stories that could be heard. It's very interesting. I should say it's very interesting subject. If I have to choose again to go back to university, I would have chosen history to study actually. But still, we are living in the present and we are looking for the future. And the best thing to deal with history is really to be fair to history by reconciling history with present and the future. Not really reversing it because it's irreversible. All historical events sometimes, unfortunately, is not really to be dealt with by a reversing thing. Because new realities on ground dictate really the situation more than anything. Imagine if we have to reverse history of North America, for example. Are we going to take all of the slaves or descendants back to Africa? I mean, is this exactly what's needed? That looks ridiculous, no proposition. Even the Africans won't like that. But given those slaves' right to become so much equal to the whites and the others, to the extent that one of their sons could be president of the place, like Barack Obama, that's actually an affirmative action to help history reconcile with the present and the future. I think this is the plight of Palestinians. So those who think that we are asking to push all the Jews from the Holy Land, which we call Palestine and they call it Israel, is not real. We, the Palestinians, had struggled very well with ourselves. Maybe from a weak point, by the way, to reconcile our understanding and our narrative of our history and how we can approach it, politically speaking, on ground. And we said, we accept both propositions. At the beginning, the ideal thing that we thought that there is enough room for everybody in one state, on one national liberal state, which is dictated by a constitution, by equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of their backgrounds. And then, when we thought that this Israel was created to be a Jewish state, we thought, well, it might be a good idea to divorce and live together side by side in two independent states. And the world had loved this idea, and because it goes along with United Nations history, starting from the partition plan into other resolution, mainly 242 of 1967 borders, which talks about the state of Palestine less than 22% of the original territories of historical Palestine. Well, it seems that we reconcile between ourselves how we reconcile history with the present. But our adversary, not to say our enemy, they think no, they can dictate the terms and they go for all. They can still dictate their version and they think that power can create a new realities in ground to the extent they don't believe that we exist up till now. They don't think that a Palestinian state or a Palestinian national liberation or an entity or identity could exist. This is what we translate their actions. They accept, rhetoric-wise, de facto on ground they are creating every day a new reality by building settlements, bringing settlers from wherever it is possible. From Russia, Ethiopia, wherever. Even if they are not Jews, they are ready to bring them and call them to be Jews. To build a reality which would replace Palestine. Unfortunately, the dynamics of this is very, very ironic. From one side, the whole world says about Palestine to exist. The reality on the ground is really creating new difficulty to make this impossible to be done. We, on the other side, as Palestinians, we are doing our best to be realistic by staying at home. This is the only difference that we find it really possible. By creating life, by creating institutions, because every national project needs its own institution. It needs its own government, it needs its own population, it needs its own economy, it needs its foundation. And that we have done a great deal of that. Not the best that we can do, I should say. But what we are trying with all these odds and circumstances, which they are extremely difficult under occupation, this is exactly what we are doing. Asia-Africa Conference had established different mechanisms on that, at the political level, diplomatic level, and at the economic level. This is why we started within the new Asia-African strategy partnership, because back then in its version had been updated during Yanuardi regime here in Indonesia to something which we call NASP, New Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership. Within this framework, we thought Asia and Africa can help us in building the state in the socio-economic sense through capacity building projects. Last year, we have got another conference, which we call it SIAP, Conference of East Asian Countries for Development of Palestine. We don't know how states are to be built, so we have to learn from our Asian African brothers their experience, which is successful in most of the time. But what we need more, because our brother Mahfoud had mentioned it, which is actually painful to say, that the Israelis on the other side have succeeded to penetrate through Asia Africa in a way or another. And in some cases, they've been successful, I should say. But that's not the end of the world. Actually, to tell you frankly, I'm not so much worried about that. Those kind of little penetration here and there, based on what we call interests, you know, states are not running a charity organization, they are running interests. I mean, it's not the Israelis are fooling Asian and Africans in a way and really trap them in this kind of unholy relation. Sometimes some governments who are elected in a way or another sometimes, they think that they could do much better to serve their own interests in these countries that they need to deal with Israel, thinking that Israel would have a big say on the politics in Washington through its Jewish lobby, which is quite efficient. So they use it as a bait sometimes. In some cases, there is under-table relation which goes through some militaries and some other intelligence agencies and so on. But what's more important for me is what about the public level? If you go and do polls in Nigeria or in India or anywhere, Palestine issue is so deep. The policy of India would not be dictated by Mr. Modi, with my due respect, but by Gandhi and by the Indian. The Indians are loyal to their history, and they know what colonialism is. But the modern India, within the new challenges of today, of course, is a country which seeks its own interests. And maybe they find some way to see that Israel could really fit to their interests. But that's not on the cost of Palestine on the other hand. Now, what's the guarantee for that? I can give only one example. If you go to Indonesia, for example, as a case, not a single Indonesian would really think that his country should open a diplomatic tie with Israel. Not even one. And they stick to that. The guarantee is the public. All Indonesians, regardless of their cultural or religious background, they are totally with support of Palestine. And all political parties, Palestine for them is outside the debate. So there is a consensus here about the fairness, about the justice of this issue, deep in the minds and the hearts of all Asian and African, because it has been the issue of colonialism, the only example of colonialism which still exists in the form of military occupation. Now this is a good guarantee and we need to take it. Israel should not be allowed to do what they are doing without being punished. I highly appreciate what BDS movement is doing. Although it is in Europe and America, but now we can see it coming also to Africa and South Africa in particular, even in such societies like Australia. Apartheid has been defeated, not militarily, it has been defeated as ethically and morally. It's incorrect, it's unjust. This is what we need to consolidate, actually, because the Israelis could be defeated well without military action necessary. If Israel will be told that you are not allowed to cross this ethical line by the entire world, then they will stop. They are not a superpower in that sense. So what we are hoping actually to see a big real shift in the dynamics of how we practice this political world is through a material and practical action in the term of boycott, divestment, and sanctions to Israel, whether at government level or non-governmental level, at everybody level. Of course, I'm not talking about academia and others and so on, because it's already going on, and I can see it is really growing and growing. But the future is really promising, I should say. I have no doubt about it. The Palestinian state is a matter of time. It's coming. And we are still there waiting for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So rapidly, without time, 5 minutes, but Dr. Noha, please.
Thank you very much. In follow-up of my talk and in reaction also to something our ambassador has said, I will speak again about the difference between history and memory. You cannot reconcile history with anything, but you can maybe reconcile memory, popular memory. Actually, Ricoeur's book is history as different from memory. History is history, the truth. Now, memory is another problem. The Palestinians, for example, are insisting as a nation to memorize, and to remember and to commemorate everything that has been done to them. Now, memory is selective. It might be by force reconciled with the present. For example, the Israelis don't want to hear the word Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. They don't want to hear the word Nakba. They will change and distort information. They will use their own manipulation of history in order to change the memory of the Palestinian people. Whether they can or cannot, this depends on the popular liberation struggle and on the resistance movement, independently of what this will lead to. Now, there are very common misconceptions in Palestinian history which have been reproduced by the media and which are myths, that the Israelis try. For example, one of them we mentioned the other day, that it is because of Nazi Germany the Jews had nowhere to go, and then they went to Palestine and even Yuri Avneri, who's supposed to be a peace dove in Israel, says, I heard him saying, what could the Jews have done? It's like a burning building. The building was burning, people are running out of the building, so they fall on someone else. They fell on the Palestinians because of the burning building. This is a misconception, since, as we show historical truth, the plan started a long time ago. Another, I would like to comment on the question of what the Palestinians call the boycott and divestment movement, which is now a international movement, according to the words of our colleague yesterday. At the beginning, it was like our comrade says, that it was only against what is produced in the settlements. But the BDS now, and this is another small misconception, it is not only against the settlements. The real BDS movement, to which I do not belong, because I agree, but it's a militant movement, boycott, divestment, BDS. Divestment means calling people who have invested in Israel to remove their investment. Boycott is to boycott everything that is produced in Israel, not only in the settlements, because that's also a misconception that only the settlements are illegal, where the whole occupation is illegal. For example, in France, there is a very big movement of boycott against Israeli companies, for example, medicine companies, which have become giant companies in the world, and we don't even know that we are being given or sold Israeli medicine. Whereas even in France and London, there are French companies and British companies that are producing. And this story of generique, which means that they sell you what do you call the generic? So there's, for example, a very important Israeli company called Teva, which is distributed all over the world, and it's Israeli. In the Monde Diplomatique, the last issue, where they talk about the media in France, one of the richest persons in the media in France is Israeli. 9 millionaires, not only which are part of all the money, is Israeli money. I'm not talking about Jews. We are talking about Israel. And the question of the political status of Israelis that was mentioned in the Balfour Declaration led to the fact that French citizens who have double nationality are in the Israeli army. This is something also that a third world or Afro-Asian movement should say. How can you accept that an Indonesian, for example, or an Indian who has also an Israeli nationality goes and serves in the Israeli army? I mean, this is a fallacy, a historical, dramatic, violation of if you are a French citizen, then you don't go and fight in the Israeli army. These are the many misconceptions. The other misconception, as Makram said, that it goes to the extent that some British think that the Palestinians occupied Israel. That's the extreme. But many people will say, you are two communities, equal communities. No. Israel is a nuclear power. It has the fourth largest army in the world. If no one wants them to be thrown into the sea, this is old, they have to live with us, but peacefully. And there is a very big French philosopher, Maxime Rodinson, who was of Jewish origin, who spoke about the de-Zionization of Israel, which means once Israel stops being expansionist, stops being a nuclear power, stops being a military power in the area, then of course we will live as two states, or as two peoples in one state. But how can you live in this with this unbalanced formula? Whether they have more water, they are diverting waters, so that the Palestinians have 1/10 or 1/15 or 1/20 of the water that one Israeli has. There are gas, mines all over the place. Even they are infringing on Lebanese gas.
Shall we conclude? Because we are out of time.
What we want to say is that, of course, we want to live in peace, but with who? This is the important question.
Okay, quickly, if I may.
Yeah, please, Dr. Hassan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, and then we have 3 or 4 minutes for...
Sure. What I'd like to say is that information or disinformation have never parted really the minds of policymakers in Israel. They see actually media warfare, disinformation and propaganda as part of war, and clearly you must have heard as well about the embedded journalists, and this was actually a long tactic and an old tactic ran by Israel before the Americans used it in the 2003 war in Iraq. What I am saying, Your Excellency, is yes, we have to be optimistic, but the source of optimism should be our struggle, our constant struggle, but this shouldn't make us forget that it's been 67 years. We don't know how many more years where the story is going to last and the occupation is going to last. I emphasize here that Palestine is a long-term cause. Even if there will be a state at some point, it's a long-term cause for our partnership here, and therefore what tells us Gramsci actually in his memoir from prison, he says that this is a counter-hegemonic project. It's a project which should be one and re-one, a project which we should work in order to counter the oppressive dominant power of the occupier, so that we are actually ready at every twist and turn to continue to counter him or them until they actually fail. And this is why I'm kindly requesting the establishment in this way or another, whether it's part of a whole lobby which would serve the whole Bandung conference, or a lobby which will have a campaign for Palestine, this international constellation, so that Palestine will remain the soul of the spirits of the Bandung Conference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mata. So, one announcement, there will be coffee there outside, but no coffee break. The other round table is going to take place immediately after this one. But I think that it's important for the audience to have at least the possibility to put through 2 or 3 questions. Yeah. So let us be really very, very brief and concrete in the questions, please. We have first Darwish, Dr. Mohanty, and 2 more here. I don't think we could have more than 4, well, 5. Okay, 5 here, and then of course we can outside continue in some way with this conversation informally. So, Darwish, please, would you have the floor?
Yes, I will try to be very short. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. First, the position of Bandung in 1955 on Palestine is not 1 but 2. That you know that Burma and India, they were in favor of inviting Israel to the Bandung Conference. Because for Nehru, it is better to criticize Israel, the French, the Arab people come to Bandung criticizing Israel in front of Israel. This is the first position. The second position is reject the participation of Israel. Now this double position is also come back later, that some of Bandung countries, they make diplomatic relations with Israel. Egypt, for example, the first one. And others, I don't know if India has a relation with Israel. Burma is the first Asian country recognized Israel and has a relation with Israel. Now, for example, Indonesia, Abdurrahman Wahid, President Wahid, tried to launch his ideas to make a diplomatic relation with Israel. But the people rejected it. So my question is, what shall we do? What is best for you if our countries to have relations with Israel or not? This is the question.
Thank you very much. Professor Mohammed, please.
I think Israel has managed to create a lobby and has taken advantage of the global capitalist wave at the moment, which has made it difficult for us to be optimistic about the scenario. My fear is that the present militarized occupation and contradiction has more reasons to continue for a longer time than we saw it 20 years ago. That is my fear, unfortunately, and that is why today for our initiative, Palestine is a good test. In fact, we should have a research group or whatever you call it on Palestine. We should have very specific research projects on some of these issues. Therefore, this will test our social science and our capital strategy. Now in India, from then till now, we have massive support for Palestine, liberation and statehood, and full independence. But at the same time, not only military importer of weapons, Israel has provided the intelligence and the night regional aircrafts for all the operations against the militants, against the Naxalites, and now just 2 weeks ago our president visited both Palestine and Israel, and there is a possibility that our prime minister might also visit, or first the Israeli prime minister will visit. So at one level that there is a massive support for Palestine in India. I'm part of a group which boycotts not only goods, that campaign, but also the, there are some scholarly networks.
Academic boycott.
Academic boycott. So we have participated in the academic boycott. There have been marches to Gaza. Some 6 or 7 years ago, we had a march to Gaza. Therefore, in India, rest assured, the solidarity for Palestine continues very strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. There was two persons who had performed. You, please, our Philippine colleague here, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's not a question. I just want to express something. This is an academic forum, and it gives me discomfort to listen to 3 speakers dominating the discussion, asking us or persuading us to form a lobby against Israel. I don't believe there is a single Jew around here who can also speak and defend itself from this criticism. That I think is not just. Since we're talking about this from the standpoint of justice, I heard you mention that about 3 times, then I think it behooves all of us to listen to the other party to find out what really is the objective truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please, let us summarize, please. We have very, very little time.
Thank you very much. My name is Thomas Senegal. I'm the director of this museum. A very brief reason, as has been explained by all the speakers, that the most challenging factors or the most challenging matters in the Palestinian struggle for independence is the imbalance coverage of the media of what is going on in Palestine. I'd like to know in these cases, what is the Palestinian strategy to deal with this, and how the Asian African countries could help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the last question, please.
Yes, my name is Lee Kiu Chi from China.
Okay, just one more.
I'd like to stress the people solidarity that has been going on, and the way we would like to highlight to promote the visibility of the Palestinian cause in the alternative media. I am part of a project called 1,000 Women for the Nobel Peace Prize, which we launched in 2005. And among the women, so we have a lot of Palestinian women, and 2 weeks ago, the celebration of our 10th anniversary, we had 11 peace tables all around the world, and we had one also in Palestine. But then we are working not only with Palestinian women, we are also bringing women from Israel, from different places, from Arab countries, to talk to each other. And I think we need to recognize that while we are talking about the state, at the state level, there's the animosity, but then at the people's level, so there are also a lot of this solidarity work going on. I'd just like to talk about one media which is called the wikipeacewomen.org, and in which we are trying to collect 1 million Peace Women's stories. And we are very proud to say that we launched that 6 days ago in Switzerland. And on the Arab page, we have the 7 Palestinian women's stories which are being featured. And I feel there's a need to highlight and make and give recognition and visibility to the cause of Palestine and the struggles of the Palestinian women.
Please, you have the floor. Briefly.
Thank you very much. I have to take exception of this agenda authoritarianism. I've been raising my hand and refuse to recognize me. Not that I'm at the back. We have to be objective in this matter because it's a national issue. Don't just allow it to be one-sided. And that has been the problem. That has been the problem. And let me say something which we've been trying to evade. I'm a historian. And I did my PhD research in the Middle East. I'm very comfortable with the situation in the Middle East. One problem which the Palestinians have been having is their tendency to cover up the internal Arab conspiracy in the Palestinian lands. They think of America, they talk of Israel, they talk of Africa, and they say, what of the internal Arab conspiracy? First of all, the Bandung+60, the Bandung 1955 Bandung resolution, the last one said they agreed, yes, on Palestinian rights, but they must be done by peaceful means. And I agree that His Excellency is in line with that idea. But then I also know that His Excellency must be a member of the Fatah party in Palestine. And here you see Fatah say, look, Israel, we believe in your right of existence. But the other way, Hamas are saying, no, we don't want Israel the right of existence. So Palestinians among themselves have not even agreed. So how? So don't you think? First, that's a different factor.
Okay.
Yes. Secondly, the war of 1948. From 1948 to 1967, Jordan, most Arabs did not support the idea of the creation of Palestinian state. Because Jordan occupied the present West Bank, Egypt occupied Gaza, Syria occupied Golan Heights, until they were liberated by Israel. In that moment. So, in actual sense, the Arabs did not even support the real Palestinian state. And again, 1969, Jordan attacked. Pushed the whole Palestinians from Palestine. They pushed them away. So they put Jordan, expelled the whole Palestinians on their land. In 1987, Lebanon did the same. Egypt also, yes.
But we need to hear what the answer for the question that was
I am told because these are usually African. But presently, Israel has informal relations with the Gulf nations. Saudi Arabia presently is splitting with Israel. And you are calling Africa, you are calling Asia. So how can we reconcile the Arab entire conspiracy against Palestinian people with the North Africans and Asian countries? That's my own position.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ambassador, please, you have the floor, and then we will be repeating the same answer for each of us. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And thanks for the questions. I should say some of them are quite really interesting and provoking in a way. You see, the whole discussion that we are taking here is based on Bandung spirit, which is not really for debate here. Even recently, in the last while commemorating 60 years of Asia-Africa, there was another one special document, which I hope all participants should have, one declaration of Asia and Africa on Palestine, which has been agreed through 3 minutes discussion. There was no debate about it, not from India, not from Nigeria, not from anywhere. So the understanding about how we address Palestine is not anymore for debate when we talk about states and governments. Maybe still within different opinions, which we happily really ready to debate, if still some people are not convinced about how Asia and Africa view this issue historically and currently and even future-wise. I think within the Asia-Africa we have got a consensus on that. So I don't think we need to torture us as if we are indifferent. We are not. We are talking about an independent state of Palestine living next to Israel, not in the place of Israel. Unfortunately, this offer has been rejected practically by Israel, and they are buying time to go beyond it. They don't say directly, but their processing ground is actually a direct evidence that they don't want this to happen. They do act on ground contrary to this proposition. And they will abort it. They will abort it if they are given enough time. So time is of essence here. As Makrama says, we need really an action here. That makes me reply to the question about how about having diplomatic ties or not having diplomatic ties with Israel. To tell you frankly, I approach this question all the time in this way. In politics, and this is the way of life in politics, we have 2 ways to influence people. There is the carrot way and there is the sticks way. So you can tempt some people, make them do what you want by incentives. Promise them, indulge them if you like. I think the world had gone so far in this policy with Israel. They have been indulged by everybody around the whole world. Some of them even have been given some Nobel Prize for crimes which they were not even penalized. Israel has given every opportunity and incentive to come into terms with international community. And it did not work. It had encouraged them to become even more arrogant and neglect all the commitments as per the United Nations and international charters around the world. And they don't care about actually what we discuss here or even General Assembly. And they are not even listening to all councils of human rights and here and there, even by ECJ and the others. They feel that they are above the international law. We had seen this stubbornness in the case of South Africa, didn't we? This is why it took the South Africans 600 years to come into the obvious one man, one vote. If it was not for the international community who said no to apartheid, we would still living under apartheid in South Africa as well, or maybe even Namibia and somewhere else, in Zimbabwe and the rest of the continent there. But the world came united against one thing, not against the whites in South Africa, no, against apartheid. So what we are talking here, not to be against the Jews or anybody. You should be against the military foreign occupation to other nations, which is called Palestinian people. That would help Israel to come into terms. If they are told strongly and practically that the world is not going to condemn this behavior forever, then they will come into terms. Why we have doubt about that? The issue is that we need to activate this policy in real and practical way. Well, in the case of South Africa, we boycotted them through sports. We boycotted them diplomatically. We boycotted them through trade. We have done everything till they came to terms and they surrendered. And they came into terms, and now it's a different South Africa. Can we do that with Israel? This is exactly what we are asking the world to do. To activate what the international community had already decided and agreed upon. There is enough library of the stuff what the international community had told Israel what they are supposed to do, and they did not do, and they ignored it, and they violated every day. As if they don't care what we are deciding here and there. They are not listening. They think that they can still do their crimes and get away with it. I think this is what we are asking. So building diplomatic ties come with that. Are we going to give them more incentive to come into terms, or we should rather give them the stakes, diplomatic stakes, economic stakes, ethical, moral, academic, in every area, commercial even? Then they will feel that they are not accepted within the international community as a normal member of nations unless they come into terms with the norms and tradition. If we give them a strong signal on that, I tell you they will come to terms. They will come to terms. But so far, it seems we are not doing good enough to reach that point of climax. I'm not saying that we are not doing at all, but not good enough. So we need only to score more points, put them in the box, diplomatically, ethically, morally, and then the democracy inside Israel will play other way around. And we will find different people inside Israel who will change the turn and course of things and their behavior as well. That's actually my personal belief that could work. Meanwhile, we in Palestine, we need your support so that we remain there, that we are not evicted, that we are protected. Actually, this is exactly what we were talking yesterday in Geneva in front of the Human Rights Council. We need protection because now Israel is practicing random killing in front of camera. They don't care, children, whoever. They would like to make it impossible for us even to stay in our home and leave it for them. They might take advantage of any chaos in the region and do a massive, expulsion to whatever left there. Their eye is only in East Jerusalem, and they don't want Gaza altogether, so they keep it away, besieged, cornered, irrelevant place, while they are targeting the rest of the West Bank really to push them out and make their life economically not possible or feasible. We need your support so that we maintain our roots and we stay there, because it's a matter of time to win. But meanwhile, we need to guarantee that your Palestinian brothers and sisters are living inside Palestine, not outside Palestine. This is actually what we need from Asia, Africa, and the rest of the world, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Ambassador Dawi, and give the floor Dr. No.
Yes, I would like to answer our Filipino colleague from Philippines, because she you restated what Dr. Makram said in a different way. He said, we want to do something for Palestine, and you said we are asking you to do something against Israel, if I understood correctly. And that's not at all the same thing. For Palestine, you can equate it for justice, for peace, and not against any particular group, but against military action, military occupation, arrests, daily bombs, against strong military power, against nuclear power. So it's a question of a moral question. It's not preferring one side against the other. It's going back to the moral question. So I agree with our ambassador that it will take a long time, that the Palestinian people need protection, the Palestinian people need to work collective action, but the important thing is also to question whether the Afro-Asian movement is ahead, for example, of the United Nations General Assembly, or is it part of United Nations language and ideology, or it should be, I think it should be in advance of the international establishment. Because at the United Nations, what we are talking about today is mentioned at the United Nations. We want something better and stronger and newer and with more soul and more swanage and more Ubuntu than what is happening in the international establishment, where one power has the capacity to veto a resolution, for example, for justice, where one power can change constantly, put an obstacle to the course of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noha. Please, finally, Dr. Huri to his answers.
Thank you. Thank you for a very good question, Mr. Manager of the museum here. I think in order to make my idea or suggestion, which is turning either the Bandung conference into a pressure group with Palestine as part of it or for Palestine, it doesn't matter. This needs a business plan. And this business plan should have a strategy, and should have a marketing strategy, and should have an events management and media relations. We're talking here about really deconstructing my idea, because I haven't actually thrown this idea out of the blue. I have been thinking about it for 3 years. In fact, initially I thought about the establishment, and I will be doing that, the establishment for the first time ever of the Lobby for Palestine internationally. And this lobby will be forging relations with any international, national, regional, NGO or cultural, academic, media body that can be really forged with. So, in fact, in order to make this idea operational, we need a business plan. I've got part of it. I definitely, if we would like to collaborate with the Bandung conference, there should be talks, mutual bilateral talks, where we can discuss this, and I'll be more than happy that Indonesia, in particular, could host something like that, or other countries, but definitely this idea can be a grand project where it can serve the spirits of the Bandung conference on the one hand, and it can have a return, because then the very raison d'etre of the Bandung conference will be absolutely implemented, and on the other hand, the Palestinians will definitely be served properly, and it will be a cause for liberation, equality, and freedom. So there will be operational, practical steps that should be taken. Now, when it comes to the very bold question from Dr. Darwish about do we or do we not? Should I stay or should I go? Well, I think that there is no point in establishing diplomatic ties with Israel if you don't have ties. And if you have ties, it's about time to use them in order to curb Israel's military occupation. So whichever is the case, it's always better not to please the thief and give him a prize for his robbery. As for the other question, Madam, about the balance or imbalance, well, to be honest, as we heard, Israel wasn't invited to the Bandung conference, and it wasn't invited for a reason. And secondly, with all due respect, I didn't hear you commenting the same way that in the gender session we should have had another session by men, for example. So I think that there is a common sense of justice that should be prevailed. We are talking here about an occupation. We are not indulging and entertaining ourselves with Israeli pop here. We are talking about an occupation which is stifling the lives of millions of Palestinians on a daily basis. And interestingly enough, you are talking to someone whose family and myself have been living in the part of Palestine that was occupied in 1948. Palestine was occupied in two steps, 48 and 67. And I come from Jaffa, and I have been living under the first Israeli occupation ever since, and I master Hebrew, and I assure you that what we are doing is very much acceptable on many intellectual Jews and Israelis. And if you follow the research, the fresh research by new historians, you will find out that the overwhelming majority of anti-Zionist and anti-Israel stances have been written by Israeli Jewish scholars against the policies of Israel and against the ethnic cleansing that Israel has been conducting in historical Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much.